It all started with a little girl's innocent question, a simple cross necklace, and a moment that touched an entire community. This is a story of hope, generosity, and the unexpected ways we can impact others. The Charleston charity fundraiser was in full swing, filling the historic community hall with warmth and laughter. The scent of sweet tea, fresh biscuits, and homemade pies mingled with the hum of conversation as local families, business owners, and volunteers gathered to support a cause close to their hearts, raising funds for underprivileged children in the area. String lights twinkled overhead, casting a soft glow over the neatly arranged tables where silent auction items, a quilt hand-stitched by a local artisan, a basket of homemade jams, and a weekend getaway at a cozy bed and breakfast, waited for generous bidders. Karoline Levitt stood near a folding table stacked with pamphlets, shaking hands and exchanging warm smiles. As a passionate advocate for education and community outreach, she had spoken at countless events, but these small-town gatherings always held a special place in her heart. Unlike the larger, more polished galas, this was where real connections were made, where people came not for prestige, but for purpose. She listened attentively as a retired schoolteacher shared concerns about local funding cuts, nodding thoughtfully, offering reassurance where she could. This was why she loved what she did, not for the attention or the applause, but for the genuine, unfiltered stories people shared. Every person here had a story, a struggle, a reason for being present tonight. But just as Karoline was about to respond, a small tug at her sleeve made her pause. It was soft, almost hesitant, but insistent enough to pull her from the conversation. She turned to find a young girl, no older than 7, standing before her with curious wide blue eyes and golden curls tied in a loose ponytail. Her floral dress was slightly wrinkled, and she clutched the hem as if gathering the courage to speak. But her eyes weren't on Karoline's face. They were fixed on the delicate gold cross necklace resting just above her collarbone. "What does your necklace mean?" the little girl asked softly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the fundraiser. Karoline blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Of all the conversations she had expected to have tonight, this wasn't one of them. The question was so simple, so innocent, yet it carried a weight that reached into the deepest corners of her past. She instinctively reached for the necklace, rubbing the smooth edges of the cross between her fingertips as memories long buried surfaced. For years, that cross had been more than just an accessory. It had been a reminder, a symbol of resilience, faith, and a deeply personal journey. She thought back to the moment she had first clasped it around her neck. A night of sorrow and searching, of doubt and quiet revelation. The room around them continued to buzz with conversation, the clinking of glasses and the distant melody of a live acoustic performance filling the space. But for Karoline, the world had momentarily shrunk down to just her and this little girl. She crouched to meet the child at eye level, offering a warm smile. "That's a very special question," she said, her voice gentle. "This cross, it means a lot of things. It reminds me that even when life gets really hard, I'm never alone." The little girl tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Like when you're sad?" she asked. Karoline nodded. "Exactly. It helps me remember that even in my toughest moments, there's always hope." The child's small fingers grazed the pendant lightly, as if trying to feel the meaning behind Karoline's words. She hesitated, then whispered, "My mom used to have one like this, but she had to sell it." Karoline felt her chest tighten at the little girl's words. She had to sell it. That simple statement stirred something deep within her, something she had tried to bury beneath years of resilience and determination. As she looked at the child's hopeful yet hesitant face, she felt herself being pulled back in time, to a memory that had never truly faded. She had been 19 years old, a college freshman in Nashville, struggling to find her place in a world that suddenly felt too big and too unfamiliar, juggling late-night study sessions, 2 part-time jobs, and the unshakable pressure to succeed. She often felt like she was just barely holding everything together. But then, in the middle of a cold November night, everything changed with a single phone call. Her mother's voice had been soft, wavering in a way Karoline had never heard before. "Grandma's gone." The words had shattered something inside her. Her grandmother, the woman who had taught her how to bake biscuits from scratch, who had whispered bedtime prayers with her every night, who had worn the same delicate gold cross necklace for as long as Karoline could remember, was gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no warning. She barely remembered the bus ride home or the quiet, tear-grilled days that followed, but she would never forget the night she had wandered into her grandmother's bedroom, seeking comfort in the familiar scent of lavender that still clung to the quilt. And there, on the nightstand, lay the cross necklace. Karoline had picked it up, running her fingers over the worn edges of the pendant, feeling the faint warmth left behind. It was the only thing of her grandmother's she had taken, the only piece of her she could keep close, but it hadn't felt comforting at first. Instead, she had gripped it tightly, anger and grief twisting inside her. How could God take someone so kind? She had spent that night curled up on her grandmother's bed, tears soaking into the fabric as she whispered a desperate prayer, not for answers, but just for something, anything to make the emptiness bearable. She had waited for a sign, for some grand revelation, but none came. Instead, there was only a quiet, steadying presence, the smallest flicker of peace settling into her heart. And from that moment on, she had never taken the cross off. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a reminder of everything her grandmother had taught her, of faith, of love, of the quiet strength that carried you through even the darkest nights. Now, kneeling in front of this little girl, Karoline felt the weight of that memory settle into the moment, because she recognized something in the child's eyes: loss, longing, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. Karoline took a slow breath, steadying herself as she looked into the little girl's wide, expectant eyes. The child wasn't asking for a history lesson or a theological debate. She was asking for something deeper, something that couldn't be explained with mere words. What does your necklace mean? It was such a simple question, yet it carried the weight of everything Karoline had wrestled with over the years. Faith had never been easy for her. It wasn't the kind of blind certainty that some people seemed to carry so effortlessly. For her, faith had always been a fight, something she held on to even when it felt like it was slipping through her fingers. When her grandmother had passed, when she had faced rejection and failure, when the world had felt too heavy, there were times when she had wondered if any of it really mattered. But through it all, she had come to understand that faith wasn't about having all the answers. It wasn't about certainty. It was about trust. She thought back to the night she had clutched that cross in her grandmother's bedroom, demanding some kind of sign, something to prove that God was still listening. But no booming voice had spoken to her, no miracle had erased her pain. Instead, there had been only silence, but not an empty one. It was the kind of silence that didn't press down on her, but instead lifted some of the weight she had been carrying. It was a quiet reassurance, like the feeling of standing in the middle of a dark road and seeing a single flicker of light ahead. That was when she realized something profound. Faith isn't about knowing, it's about choosing to keep going even when you don't. It's about believing in something bigger than yourself, even when life feels unfair. It's about holding on, even when you have every reason to let go. Karoline looked at the little girl again, her fingers brushing against the cross at her collarbone. "This necklace," she said, her voice gentle but sure, "reminds me that even when I feel alone, I never really am." The little girl blinked up at her, processing the words. Then, with a quiet voice, she whispered, "My mom used to say that too." And just like that, Karoline knew this was the moment she was meant to have. Not to preach, not to convince, but to share what had carried her through. Because sometimes faith isn't about answers at all. It's about being there, standing in the quiet, and reminding someone else that they're not alone. Karoline blinked, pulling herself back to the present, her fingers still resting lightly against the cross at her collarbone. The little girl Emma watched her with an expression both curious and expectant, as if she somehow knew that Karoline had traveled somewhere far away for a moment. But now, the moment belonged to Emma. Karoline crouched down again so they were at eye level. "What about you, sweetheart?" she asked gently. "Why did you want to know about my necklace?" Emma hesitated, glancing down at the hem of her dress, twisting it slightly in her small hands. My mom used to have one just like it, she admitted in a quiet voice. She told me it meant that, even when things are scary, we're never really alone. Karoline felt something tighten in her chest. It was the kind of answer that held more weight than a child's words usually did. That's a beautiful thing for her to say, she murmured. She sounds like a really special person. Emma nodded but didn't look up. She had to sell it, she whispered after a long pause, when things got bad. Karoline's breath caught. Suddenly the room felt a little smaller, the warm glow of the event's chandeliers dimming just slightly under the weight of what this little girl had just shared. She had spent years meeting people from all walks of life, some struggling, some thriving, but nothing quite prepared her for the quiet heartbreak of a child revealing a sacrifice she never should have had to witness. I bet she would want you to have one again, Karoline said softly, a small smile playing at her lips as an idea took root in her mind. Emma finally met her eyes, hope flickering there for just a second. You think so? I know so. Karoline reached behind her neck, feeling the delicate clasp of her necklace, the one that had carried her through her own darkest days. She hesitated for only a breath before unclasping it, pulling it free from her skin. Then, just as gently, she reached for Emma's small hand and placed the necklace in her palm. Emma gasped, her fingers curling protectively around the cross. But this is yours, she said, wide-eyed. Karoline smiled, her heart full. Now it's yours. The moment Karoline placed the delicate cross into Emma's small hands, something in the air shifted. The weight of the gesture was felt by everyone who had been watching the quiet exchange. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she curled them around the necklace, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. The room had been filled with polite conversation and the clinking of silverware just moments before, but now an undeniable hush settled over the crowd. Then from the corner of the room a voice spoke up. That's a beautiful thing you just did. Karoline turned to see an older woman, perhaps in her 60s, stepping forward. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly and her eyes shimmered with emotion. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet pouch, pressing it into Emma's mother's hands. It's not much, she said softly, but every child deserves to have something special. Emma's mother, who had been standing just a few feet away, stunned into silence, looked down at the pouch, then back up at the kind stranger. She shook her head in disbelief. I can't accept this, she stammered. But before she could finish her sentence, another person stepped forward. This time, a businessman, still holding his untouched champagne flute, placed an envelope on the table next to her. For groceries, he said simply. And then, just like that, the ripple effect began. A local shop owner removed a small gift card from her wallet and handed it over with a warm smile. For you and Emma, maybe something just for fun, she said, winking at the little girl. A young man in a suit stepped forward next, reaching into his pocket for a few bills. No child should have to give up something important, he murmured, slipping the money into Emma's mother's shaking hands. One by one, people came forward, each offering what they could. Some gave money, others offered services, free meals, clothing donations, even job leads. It was an outpouring of generosity, sparked not by obligation, but by something deeper, something real. Emma clutched the necklace tightly, looking up at Karoline with pure awe. I told you, Karoline whispered, smiling through her own tears. You're never alone. And in that moment, it wasn't just Emma and her mother who felt the truth of those words. It was everyone in the room. Margaret, Emma's mother, stood amidst the overwhelming generosity surrounding her, her hands trembling as she tried to take in everything that had just happened. The small velvet pouch in her palm, the crisp bills from kind strangers, the free meal vouchers. None of it felt real. Her throat tightened with emotion, and when she finally looked up, her eyes met Karoline's. Tears welled up, spilling onto her cheeks as she reached out and gripped Karoline's hands with both of hers. I don't know how to thank you, Margaret whispered, her voice raw with emotion. I never expected any of this. She glanced down at Emma, who was still clutching the cross necklace as if it were the most precious thing in the world. You've given my daughter something I never could. And this, she motioned toward the kindness pouring in around her, this means more than I can ever put into words. Karoline squeezed Margaret's hands gently, feeling the depth of her gratitude. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "None of this was about me. It was about reminding all of us what faith, kindness, and community really mean." Margaret let out a shaky breath and pulled Emma close. "I thought I was alone in this. I thought no one saw how hard things were for us, but now—" She swallowed hard, looking around at the faces of strangers who had suddenly become something more. "Now, I know we're not." Karoline stepped back, watching as Margaret and Emma were embraced by the people around them. The moment wasn't just about charity. It was about connection. It was about the way one simple act of kindness could spark something so much bigger. As she stood there, taking it all in, Karoline felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had come to this fundraiser expecting small conversations and polite handshakes, but she was leaving with something much greater, a renewed sense of purpose. It reminded her of why she did what she did, why she had chosen to devote her life to lifting others up. This wasn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It was about moments like this, when faith, love, and humanity converged in the most unexpected yet beautiful ways. And as she looked at Emma's beaming face, she knew this was exactly where she was meant to be. As the Charleston charity fundraiser came to a close, Karoline Levitt reflected on the power of kindness. What had begun as a little girl's simple question had turned into something far greater, a reminder that faith is not about grand gestures, but about showing up for others in life's quiet moments. Emma still clutched the delicate cross, much like Karoline had once done when she needed something to hold on to. Watching the young girl's face light up with hope, Karoline understood that the necklace was more than just jewelry. It was a symbol of resilience, comfort, and the belief that no one walks alone. Nearby, Emma's mother, Margaret, wiped away tears as strangers stepped forward with kindness and support. What had started as hardship had become a testament to the strength of human connection. Karoline knew this night wouldn't be forgotten, not just by Emma and Margaret, but by everyone who had witnessed the moment. Stepping outside into the cool Charleston air, Karoline felt the weight of the evening settle. Not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Faith wasn't meant to be kept. It was meant to be lived through kindness and action. If one little girl's courage to ask a question could inspire such generosity, imagine what could happen if more people took the time to listen and care. As she glanced back at the warm lights of the charity hall, Karoline carried a challenge for herself and others. Be the light in someone's darkness, extend kindness unexpectedly, and never underestimate the power of a small act of faith, because sometimes the smallest gestures change lives forever. The story of Karoline Levitt and Emma teaches a powerful lesson about faith, kindness, and the ripple effect of small actions. It reminds us that faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about showing up for others, even in the smallest ways. When Emma asked about Karoline's cross necklace, she wasn't just curious, she was searching for reassurance, for something to hold on to. Karoline's response, shaped by her own past struggles, became more than just an answer. It became an act of kindness that reignited hope. The true impact of this story isn't just about one moment, it's about how kindness spreads. Karoline's willingness to share her experience led to an entire community stepping up for Emma and her mother. It proves that no act of generosity is too small, and that sometimes the simplest gestures, a listening ear, a small gift, or an encouraging word, can change the course of someone's life. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. Faith and kindness are meant to be lived out loud. When we take the time to help, listen, and uplift others, we create a ripple effect that extends far beyond what we can see. One act of compassion can transform lives forever.